We're all going wedding cake tasting for my wedding. I was going to have Tammy at my cake testing, but she don't want nothing to do with me. I'm done trying. I threw out all my olive branches. I ain't got no more on the tree. This is us. This is the cake decorating cake testing crew. Okay. I have an appointment for a cake tasting.
Typically, I just meet with the bride and the mom of the bride, but then I was kind of taken back because it was the whole family.
The moment Tammy walked into the calf, the air already felt heavy, though nobody outside the situation could have guessed it. Cameras were rolling, capturing every subtle glance, every shift of weight, and yet, behind the lens, the tension was palpable. On the surface, it looked like a simple meeting, two sisters attempting to navigate a fractured relationship, but beneath that surface, there was a storm ready to erupt. Tammy claimed she had entered the room with the intention to apologize, a gesture that might have hinted at a turning point. But almost immediately, the room's fragile balance began to unravel. Amy, seated and tense, didn't waste any time. She confronted Tammy about the comments that had pushed this relationship to the brink. The accusation that Amy was a deadbeat mom. It wasn't just a throwaway line, it carried weight, history, and emotion, and Amy brought it up without hesitation. This confrontation forced Tammy to react, and within seconds, defensiveness replaced whatever conciliatory intentions she might have had. The shift was sudden and sharp, a classic fight-or-flight moment. She was under pressure, cameras, family expectations, and the raw emotion of a confrontation she had anticipated differently. Pride surged to the surface, and rational reconciliation gave way to instinctive self-protection. For viewers, this was the type of moment that immediately raises questions. Did Tammy ever truly plan to apologize? Or had she come with a different agenda entirely? Was she already frustrated from the build-up to the wedding, or was this escalation a symptom of deeper, unprocessed feelings? Even with her recent personal achievements, the weight loss, the surgeries, the new relationship, why did this seemingly minor confrontation ignite such a strong reaction? Each of these questions layered on top of the next, keeping attention fixed on the unfolding drama. As the conversation intensified, Tammy's movements and tone began signaling the inevitable. Her shoulders tensed, her hands gestured sharply, and her words took on a defensive edge. Amy, exhausted from repeated confrontations in the past, had assumed a position of emotional readiness. She knew this meeting could go either way, but she couldn't anticipate the speed or force of Tammy's reaction. Within moments, Tammy stood up, abruptly cutting the discussion short. Her exit was not just physical, it was symbolic, a refusal to engage in the emotional labor necessary to repair this fractured relationship. She left the calf, and the sound of the door closing behind her felt like a punctuation mark on a story that had no neat ending. Andrea, sitting nearby, was caught between the two sisters, mediating silently yet visibly. Her position was precarious. She was the bridge that Tammy refused to cross, the support that Amy could rely on, yet also a reminder of the failed reconciliation attempt. Andrea's body language betrayed her anxiety, leaning forward, glancing between the two, hands slightly clasped, a subtle display of tension management. In these moments, it's easy to overlook the silent psychological currents. Andrea was acting as a buffer, a negotiator, and a witness to behaviors that might otherwise have escalated further, holding the potential for either a temporary pause or a permanent rupture. Amy's reaction after Tammy's exit was immediate and raw. She started to sob quietly. The type of sobbing that carries months of pent-up frustration and grief. There was no dramatic flourish, no attempt at performative sadness, just the exhaustion of someone who has given too many chances, extended too much patience, and now faced the culmination of repeated dismissals. The words "she's dead to me" weren't spoken lightly. They were the verbal manifestation of emotional self-preservation. After years of navigating the complexity of this sibling dynamic, Amy reached a point where boundaries were no longer negotiable. The scene raises difficult questions about the nature of patience and control. Was Amy genuinely patient, or was this display an effort to assert narrative control over a story that had long been chaotic? The psychological layers are intricate. Amy's boundaries, while reasonable, intersect with public scrutiny. Every reaction is amplified under cameras. Every tear, every statement, every refusal to compromise is witnessed and recorded. For Tammy, the stakes are equally complex. Was she acting defensively out of unresolved grief for her late husband, a residual anxiety about shifting family roles, or a mixture of both? The convergence of past trauma, present achievements, and interpersonal tension created an environment primed for conflict. Even beyond the immediate emotional explosion, the event set up a series of open questions that keep viewers engaged. Will Tammy attend the wedding despite this confrontation? Is this about the animal shelter debate? Or is it merely a flashpoint for a deeper pattern of jealousy, fear, or miscommunication? Blocking Amy for the first time on social media suggested escalation, but what motivated that decision? Pride? Fear of accountability, or a misalignment between self-perception and reality? Each of these factors deepens curiosity and subtly pressures the audience to remain invested in the unfolding drama. Every step of Tammy's behavior, her defensive posture, sudden exit, refusal to return, creates tension spikes that function almost like narrative bookmarks. The first spike occurs at her initial entrance, where viewers anticipate an apology. The second spike occurs during her defensive escalation, and the third, most dramatic spike occurs at her exit. The emotional consequences ripple outward, Amy sobbing alone, Andrea stranded in the middle, and the symbolic weight of family division growing heavier with each moment. These spikes are layered and intentional, providing both immediate shock and a sense of unresolved narrative that encourages continued attention. There's also a fascinating psychological interplay between public and private personas. Both sisters are aware of the cameras, yet their behaviors reveal something more primal than any staged performance. Amy sobbing, Tammy storming out, Andrea's anxious mediation. These are all human responses, amplified by context but authentic in origin. The fight or flight instincts, pride, and emotional exhaustion all interact under the scrutiny of family and public observation, creating a multi-dimensional conflict that engages viewers both cognitively and emotionally. By the time the act reaches its conclusion, the stakes are clear but unresolved. Tammy's refusal to sit for even a 5-minute conversation is not just a singular moment of defiance, it signals potential long-term consequences for family cohesion, wedding participation, and emotional trust. The tension remains unresolved, leaving viewers to grapple with moral ambiguity. Who is right? Who is wrong? And who will bear the consequences if reconciliation fails entirely? As the act closes, a subtle yet powerful transition begins to form. The narrative has established the emotional high point and left the audience with layered questions. The unresolved reconciliation, the moral tension, the immediate emotional shock all create a bridge to the next phase of the story. What happens when the underlying grievances, jealousy, and grief intersect with larger family events and wedding milestones? How will both sisters navigate not just personal pride, but the public scrutiny of family and reality TV audiences? These unanswered questions serve as the springboard for the next act, where curiosity expands and psychological nuances deepen, ensuring viewers remain fully invested in what comes next. The calf scene may have ended with doors closing and sobs echoing, but the implications linger. Viewers are left with a vivid sense of what's at stake emotionally and socially, the unsettled energy of unresolved conflict, and the anticipation of whether boundaries, pride, and history will lead to repair or permanent rupture. In essence, the act concludes not with resolution but with a promise. The next chapter will delve deeper into motivations, complicate assumptions, and test the emotional endurance of both sisters in ways that are as compelling as they are unpredictable. The argument at the calf was just the visible tip of the iceberg. Beneath the storm of tears, storming out, and defensive posturing, there was a much deeper web of triggers, tensions, and resentments that had been simmering for months, if not years. Act 2 is about unraveling that web and understanding why a conversation about an animal shelter could explode into a confrontation loaded with years of sibling rivalry, identity struggles, and unresolved grief. What viewers see as a single fight is really a cascade of psychological pressure points, and teasing apart those pressures reveals why both sisters are trapped in a cycle that seems almost impossible to break. Tammy's mocking of Amy's PTSD claim is one of the earliest sparks in this deeper conflict. On the surface, it looks like a dismissal of trauma, a refusal to validate her sister's experience. But looking closer, this reaction speaks to more than just defiance. It's a manifestation of identity threat. Tammy, having recently undergone major life changes herself, including significant weight loss and a new relationship, may feel destabilized by Amy's own milestones, namely her wedding. Mocking the PTSD claim could be a defensive way of asserting control, subtly communicating, "I'm still relevant. I still matter. Don't make me invisible." From a psychological standpoint, minimizing someone else's emotional experience often masks a fear of being overshadowed, a feeling that your own struggles or growth are no longer center stage. Amy, in response, feels invalidated immediately. Every slight, every sarcastic comment chips away at the patience she has cultivated over years of dealing with Tammy's volatility. This invalidation isn't just emotional, it's also a challenge to Amy's authority in her own life. After all, this is her wedding preparation, her life milestone, and she expects family support rather than antagonism. When Tammy dismisses her PTSD, it's not just about the trauma claim itself, it's about Amy's autonomy, her boundaries, and her expectation of basic respect. At that moment, Amy's patience and self-protection collide, which partially explains why she decides to block Tammy on social media for the first time, a tangible signal that boundaries have been crossed beyond repair, at least temporarily. Then there's the deadbeat mom accusation. For many viewers, this line feels like the point of no return, the comment that exposes raw familial wound. The phrase carries years of judgment, shame, and expectation, and when Tammy throws it out, it lands like a weighty indictment. Amy's response is not merely about defending her parenting, though that's part of it. It's about defending her self-image and her emotional labor as a sister, partner, and soon-to-be bride. Comments like this do more than sting. They destabilize identity and challenge self-worth. Complicating matters further is Tammy's accusation that Amy is copying her wedding choice. At first glance, this seems trivial. Who notices whose officiant or ceremony style first? But this accusation exposes deep psychological layers. Tammy's perception of control slipping, her need to remain unique or in the spotlight, and her difficulty reconciling her own progress with Amy's forward momentum. This is classic sibling projection. Tammy externalizes her insecurities onto Amy, framing normal wedding planning as theft or mimicry, when in reality it's her own anxiety about relevance and recognition that's driving the critique. While all this is happening, wedding stress looms large as an amplifying factor. Weddings are emotionally charged events, high-stakes spectacles that magnify existing relational tension. Amy's desire for control, Tammy's need for validation, and the pressures of public exposure converge to create a volatile environment. One minor comment, like a discussion about an animal shelter, can trigger a disproportionate reaction because it intersects with every other stressor. Each sister is reading the other through layers of history, prior grievances, and life-changing milestones, which turn small sparks into full-blown flame. The narrative tension grows when viewers learn that Tammy has been speaking negatively about Amy and Brian to their mother. This revelation acts as a pressure valve being opened, showing that the conflict isn't contained to one meeting, it's actively influencing family perceptions and relationships outside the immediate confrontation. The audience is left wondering, does Tammy realize the extent of her own actions? Or is she so caught up in her defensive posturing that she cannot see the broader consequences? And from Amy's perspective, how much trust remains when family members are exposed to filtered, potentially biased information? Layered psychological factors continue to complicate the story. Tammy's minimization of trauma, for example, raises questions about coping strategies and emotional intelligence. Is she minimizing because she feels powerful in the moment, or is it a self-protective mechanism to avoid vulnerability? Similarly, Amy's decision to block Tammy online is both boundary setting and a strategic move to control emotional exposure, yet it also introduces new uncertainties. Will this social media barrier further escalate tension, or will it provide the necessary space for reflection? The act also encourages viewers to question assumptions about growth and maturity. Tammy's recent personal improvements, her weight loss, her successful surgeries, her stable relationship might suggest that she has moved past previous behavioral patterns. Yet this confrontation proves that external changes do not automatically translate to internal emotional regulation. Similarly, Amy's role as the patient sister willing to extend multiple chances is complicated by her need for personal autonomy and her readiness to enforce limits. By examining these contrasting trajectories, viewers are asked to reconsider who holds power in the relationship and how growth can sometimes heighten rather than resolve conflict. Every interaction in this act reinforces the idea that the argument isn't about a single incident, it's about layered identity threats, emotional validation, and long-standing rivalry. Each small comment, each sarcastic glance, and each microaggression functions as both trigger and signal, revealing the complex interplay of jealousy, pride, and expectation. This complexity creates multiple mini cliffhangers throughout the act. Around 200 words in, viewers are already questioning Tammy's intentions. Was there ever a genuine apology? At the next tension spike, Amy's invalidation response makes audiences wonder if patience is finite. And by the midpoint, the revelation of Tammy's conversations with their mother introduces broader implications for family unity and loyalty. Another layer emerges when considering grief's influence. Tammy's reactions are not happening in a vacuum. Her husband's passing left emotional gaps that intersect with the current feud. Trauma and loss can amplify defensiveness and decrease the capacity for compromise. Understanding this adds depth to her behavior, challenging viewers to consider the complexity behind seemingly irrational actions. Why escalate now, when life is improving? Perhaps because unresolved grief and lingering insecurities still have the power to trigger disproportionate responses, especially in situations where perceived competition or invalidation exists. As the act progresses, the stakes compound. If Tammy continues to feel replaced or excluded, it jeopardizes not just the sisters' relationship, but also the upcoming wedding. Every unresolved argument and every defensive move creates tension that extends beyond this single act, leaving viewers anxious about future interactions. The act closes on a particularly sharp note. If Tammy feels replaced, what happens when she is officially excluded from the largest celebration of Amy's life? This question isn't answered yet, leaving the narrative open and compelling for the audience to follow. Finally, the act's psychological richness ensures engagement. Viewers are invited to analyze behaviors rather than pass judgment. Tammy's defensiveness, Amy's boundary enforcement, Andrea's mediating role, and the hidden currents of grief and identity all intersect to create a complex web. This encourages repeat viewing and careful attention, as each gesture, word, and reaction might signal underlying motivations, revealing new insights on subsequent watch-throughs. By the end of Act 2, the audience is fully immersed in a tense, layered story where surface-level arguments mask deep emotional undercurrent. The calf storm was dramatic, but this act shows that the real feud has roots in identity, rivalry, and the struggle to maintain control over personal and family narratives. The tension is unresolved, the stakes are high, and the audience is left questioning both sisters' intentions, motivations, and capacity for repair. This sets the stage perfectly for Act 3, where division and instability escalate, opposing perspectives emerge, and the ripple effects of these arguments begin to touch every corner of the family dynamic. The wedding planning was supposed to be a time of excitement, celebration, and bonding. Instead, it became a stage where family divisions were broadcast in real time, layered with passive-aggressive tension and symbolic gestures that everyone could see, even if the cameras exaggerated them. Act 3 begins at one of the first visible public signs of this estrangement, wedding cake tasting. Normally a small, intimate event with just the bride and a few close relatives, this gathering became a tangible display of who was included and who was excluded. Tammy's absence wasn't just noticed, it loomed over the room like an unspoken accusation. Every bite of frosting, every sampling of chocolate or strawberry was a reminder of the sister she could no longer share these moments with. The bakery owner's surprise at seeing a group of 6 instead of the typical 2 or 3 highlighted more than just logistical shock. It was symbolic. The crowded support system around Amy wasn't just about family attendance. It represented a visible shift in loyalty, an emotional power shift within the family hierarchy. Where Tammy had once been central, her opinions, her presence, her approval woven into family events, now she was noticeably absent. The contrast was stark, and it was difficult not to read this as a message. Amy's life is moving forward, And Tammy is no longer in the driver's seat of this family narrative. Even small details at the cake tasting carried emotional weight. Amy and her siblings laughed, sampled, and critiqued flavors, yet beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of tension. Every comment about sweetness, texture, or frosting style became a subtle act of assertion. This is our moment, and Tammy is not a part of it. The act of including Brian, Billy, and the siblings highlighted the reshaped support system. For viewers, it raised immediate questions. Is Amy consciously enjoying the control she now holds, or is she simply asserting boundaries that have been repeatedly crossed? Each bite of cake, each round of sampling became a microcosm of power, signaling not just preference but authority over the family dynamic. Psychologically, Tammy's absence illustrates a deep sense of replacement fear. The sister who once may have been the emotional center of attention is now sidelined. This triggers classic feelings of social isolation, a profound anxiety about being left behind, and a fear that the family narrative no longer includes her. Billy, Tammy's friend, notices this shift and reacts with a mix of admiration and concern. He's shocked by Tammy's physical transformation, her weight loss, her surgeries, but beneath the surface, he recognizes emotional instability. The contrast between outward achievement and inward turmoil amplifies viewer curiosity. How can someone achieve so much and yet feel so powerless in the moments that matter most? Dress shopping for Amy further amplifies this dynamic. The sisters, Misty, Brittany, and Lely, each select dresses and give opinions, reinforcing a collective decision-making process from which Tammy is consciously excluded. Amy makes it clear that reconciliation hinges on Tammy's apology. This is not just a rule, it is a gatekeeping moment, a test of accountability that has larger symbolic meaning. The audience sees it as a crossroads. Either Tammy asserts herself, swallows pride, and reintegrates, or she is effectively excluded from major life milestones. Every choice in this shopping trip, from the selection of veils to critiques of fit, is a visual reinforcement of power and exclusion. And every decision the camera captures carries emotional symbolism far beyond the surface of fabric and lace. Andrea's role during this act is equally important. She is Tammy's anchor, guiding her through the salon appointment and emotional preparation, offering reassurance, and attempting to mediate a family reconciliation. Tammy cries, visibly shaken by both her exclusion and the ongoing family tension. Andrea promises to fix this, an open loop that heightens retention by creating anticipation. Will mediation succeed, or will the rift deepen further? Psychologically, Andrea functions as a stabilizing force for Tammy, but her involvement also raises questions for viewers. Is she enabling Tammy by cushioning her from accountability, or is she providing the necessary support to navigate trauma and loss? This act thrives on audience division. Fans are forced to take sides, or at least question their assumption. Team Amy sees Tammy as toxic, as someone refusing to take responsibility and jeopardizing family cohesion. Team Tammy perceives Amy as dismissive, rigid, and controlling, relishing the exclusion of her sister at moments that should have been celebratory. Neutral viewers are left in moral tension, weighing both sisters' behaviors and wondering where fairness and accountability truly lie. This layered viewer response is crucial. It keeps emotional engagement high and encourages debate, which prolongs watch time and deepens investment. Mini cliffhangers punctuate the act at key intervals. Tammy's tears at the salon create the first, reminding viewers of her vulnerability and setting up an unresolved emotional trajectory. Amy's insistence on accountability before forgiveness marks the next, building tension by showing the conditions for potential reconciliation without revealing if they will be met. Andrea's promise to intervene serves as a third, layering anticipation and giving viewers a sense of future stakes without resolving current tension. Each of these moments is carefully spaced to maintain attention, gradually escalating the audience's investment in both sisters' emotional journeys. The psychological lens reveals additional layers of instability. Tammy's fear of replacement intersects with grief, hormonal fluctuations, and the stress of public scrutiny, magnifying her emotional response. Amy, on the other hand, is navigating a dual challenge, asserting boundaries while managing her own anxiety about the wedding, the family narrative, and public perception. The combined effect is a volatile environment in which even neutral or small actions, smiles, critiques, or conversational asides can carry disproportionate meaning. For viewers, This highlights a key principle of human behavior. Relationships are rarely linear, and past trauma, current stressors, and perceived hierarchies constantly interact to produce unpredictable outcomes. By the midpoint of Act 3, the pattern of exclusion and symbolic power is firmly established. Tammy's absence is felt in every space she might have occupied, from tasting cakes to offering input on dress choices. The audience begins to anticipate the consequences of this sidelining. Will it provoke reconciliation, or will it deepen resentment? The open loop of public perception, both inside the family and on social media, is a subtle but powerful retention driver. Each viewer is invited to predict outcomes, to analyze micro behaviors, and to emotionally invest in the unresolved dynamics. Another key element of this act is how the public lens interacts with private behavior. Amy's decisions, though personal, are performed in a semi-public space, family gatherings under camera scrutiny. Tammy's absence is equally performative in effect, signaling to the family and audience alike that she is not participating. This tension between private emotional reality and public display creates an additional psychological layer for the audience to process. Are the sisters' actions authentic, performative, or a mix of both? The ambiguity keeps viewers mentally engaged, analyzing body language, tone, and context for hidden meaning. The act closes on a cliffhanger that encapsulates the instability. Both sisters have declared they are done, yet the unresolved nature of their emotion signals that neither is truly finished. Tammy is crying with Andrea, visibly conflicted. Amy is asserting boundaries while feeling emotional exhaustion. Andrea is caught in the middle, promising intervention without certainty of success. This unresolved moral tension encourages viewers to stay tuned. If reconciliation is still theoretically possible, what actions or failures will determine whether it happens or disintegrates completely? The stakes going into the next act are clear and immediate. Tammy's social exclusion, Amy's assertion of boundaries, and the symbolic reinforcement of family hierarchy have set up a complex battlefield. Emotional loyalty, public perception, and the looming wedding milestone all intersect to create pressure points that are bound to trigger further escalation. The unresolved conflicts and layered open loops ensure that curiosity is maintained and that viewers remain emotionally invested, eager to see how consequences will unfold when the sisters' volatile dynamic collides with the practical realities of wedding planning and ongoing personal development. By the end of Act 3, viewers are fully aware that the feud is not superficial. It is about power, attention, loyalty, and identity. Every absent bite of cake, every dress left untasted, every tear in the salon builds anticipation for the next stage, the fallout from these deliberate exclusions. The moral tension, audience division, and emotional stakes are primed to carry seamlessly into Act 4, where the consequences of these family power shifts will manifest with even greater intensity, testing patience, resilience, and the possibility of reconciliation in ways that are as unpredictable. As they are compelling, the aftermath of the calf confrontation was immediate, raw, and uncompromising. Where once there might have been room for negotiation, compromise, or even a temporary truce, the events of that day shifted the emotional and psychological balance of power between the sisters. Act 4 begins in the moments after Tammy stormed out, leaving Amy and Andrea sitting in the calf, cameras rolling, and a tangible silence that carried both tension and the weight of unspoken truth. Amy's tears were not just about the argument itself, they were a visible marker of exhaustion, frustration, and a realization that patience has limits. Each sob, each pause served as a signal to viewers that the tipping point had been reached, the point at which repeated offenses could no longer be absorbed without lasting consequences. The initial fallout is complicated by the presence of Andrea, who becomes both messenger and buffer in real time. She is tasked with relaying Tammy's refusal to return, a role that places her squarely in the middle of an emotional standoff. Andrea's frustration is subtle but visible. She has been attempting to mediate between two highly reactive individuals, and now she is powerless to bridge the gap. The audience sees a critical psychological principle in action. When one party refuses to engage and the other maintains firm boundaries, the intermediary can only observe the widening divide. Andrea's inability to resolve the conflict highlights the structural shift in family dynamics. She cannot force reconciliation, and her presence only accentuates the stark divide. Amy, in contrast, has taken a public stance of boundary enforcement. Her declaration that Tammy is toxic signals more than just anger. It is a crystallization of previous emotional labor and a formal assertion of limits. By stating this on camera, Amy transforms private frustration into public boundary setting. This is a significant power shift. Where Tammy may have previously leveraged charm, sympathy, or emotional manipulation to maintain influence within the family, Amy now holds the psychological upper hand. She controls the narrative, her limits are clear, her standards for forgiveness are established, and she is no longer willing to tolerate repeated violations. For viewers, this shift is compelling because it alters the moral and emotional calculus. Amy's assertiveness becomes a dominant force in the narrative, and the audience is left questioning whether Tammy can regain any leverage at all. Tammy's avoidance is equally telling. By refusing to face cameras, she refuses to participate in the narrative, but this refusal carries consequence. Avoidance in psychological terms is a common response to perceived threat or humiliation, yet in this scenario, it also functions as self-sabotage. Each moment of withdrawal reinforces Amy's position and weakens Tammy's ability to influence outcome. The act of walking away may feel like a temporary preservation of pride, but it simultaneously erodes her standing within the family and the broader public lens. Viewers are left to wonder, is Tammy truly protecting herself, or is she actively ceding control to Amy? Each unanswered question acts as a mini cliffhanger, sustaining curiosity about the trajectory of their relationship. This act also exposes the broader emotional stakes of repeated conflict. Amy's sobs are not just about being hurt, they are about recognition of a pattern that has persisted for years. She recounts having given Tammy 25 chances, a statement that is both literal and symbolic. It communicates that the conflict is long-standing, that repeated opportunities for reconciliation have been squandered, and that patience has limits. For the audience, this builds moral tension. The question shifts from who is at fault to what are the consequences of repeated boundary violations. It also introduces the first partial answers in this act. Tammy cannot handle confrontation calmly, and Amy's tolerance has been exhausted. The scales of emotional power have definitively tipped. Even as boundaries solidify, the act continues to layer unresolved tension. Will Tammy regret storming out? Will this single act of defiance irreversibly alter her relationship with her sister? Could family pressure force a reconciliation that neither sister genuinely desires? These questions hang in the air, generating anticipation and retaining attention. The narrative is now firmly in a phase where consequences are visible, but their ultimate impact remains unknown. This uncertainty acts as a psychological magnet, compelling viewers to stay engaged to see whether the rift is temporary or permanent. The public and performative dimensions of the fallout add another layer of complexity. Amy's breakdown is not a private catharsis, it is captured on camera, adding a performative element to her vulnerability. Tammy's refusal to be filmed similarly shapes the narrative in a public way. The juxtaposition between visible emotional collapse and invisible withdrawal creates dramatic tension. The audience witnesses one sister's raw emotion while simultaneously sensing the absence of the other, amplifying the perception of power imbalance. The camera's presence transforms ordinary family conflict into a high-stakes social drama, where public perception, reputation, and narrative control all intersect. The psychological lens also reveals the interplay of pride, avoidance, and boundary enforcement. Tammy's pride prevents her from offering a sincere apology. It overrides reconciliation impulses and leads to defensive reactive behavior. Amy's assertion of boundaries crystallizes vulnerability into control. She is no longer negotiating, pleading, or begging for cooperation. This transformation from patience to permanence signals to viewers that the relationship may be entering a new, irreversible phase. The stakes are not abstract, they are emotional, relational, and symbolic, encapsulating years of unresolved rivalry and the tangible loss of shared life moments. Amy's declaration that Tammy is toxic and the subsequent withdrawal of engagement underscores a key retention trigger. Viewers are drawn in not only by drama, but also by the ethical and emotional questions it raises. Is the boundary justified? Can a relationship survive repeated violations? How do we balance love and accountability in sibling relationships? By presenting clear consequences while leaving questions unresolved, The act maintains curiosity and emotional investment. Each moment of refusal, each tear, each declaration of toxicity functions as both consequence and narrative hook. As the act progresses, the consequences begin to ripple outward. Andrea's inability to mediate demonstrates that traditional conflict resolution strategies may no longer be effective. Tammy's withdrawal creates a vacuum in the family dynamic that cannot be filled by mediation alone. Amy's firmness establishes a new hierarchy of influence, her decisions carry weight, her boundaries are no longer negotiable, and her control over both narrative and emotional territory is reinforced. For the audience, this is both cathartic and tense. Cathartic because justice, in a sense, is being enforced, and tense because the potential fallout remains unknown. This act also emphasizes the permanence of psychological shifts. Amy's exhaustion and emotional assertiveness suggest that repeated patterns cannot continue unchecked. The calf confrontation, coupled with the refusal to engage, transforms transient frustration into long-term boundary enforcement. This crystallization of limits is a pivotal moment. It forces viewers to consider that the power dynamics have shifted for good. Tammy's prior leverage, her emotional presence, her ability to provoke reaction has been neutralized, creating uncertainty about whether she will ever regain influence. The final tension spike comes with the notion of the 25 chances Amy has given Tammy. This numerical framing converts abstract frustration into tangible accountability. It forces the audience to weigh past leniency against current consequences, heightening moral tension. By quantifying opportunities, Amy underscores the cumulative cost of repeated conflict, reinforcing the idea that tolerance has limits and that actions have consequences. The unresolved question of whether Tammy will internalize this lesson maintains curiosity even as the immediate confrontation concludes. The act closes with a strong transitional hook. If this is the last conversation they ever have, was this fight worth losing a sister? This question resonates on multiple levels. It addresses the permanence of estrangement, the emotional costs of pride and avoidance, and the larger implications for family cohesion. The unresolved nature of this question encourages viewers to continue watching, anticipating how remaining open loops, wedding participation, potential regrets, family pressures will unfold. It is both a reflective and forward-looking conclusion, cementing the stakes and setting the stage for the resolution-focused Act 5. By the end of Act 4, the narrative landscape is clear. Amy has established authority, Tammy has lost leverage, and Andrea's mediating role is strained to its limits. The family dynamic has shifted irreversibly in some ways, yet uncertainty remains about whether reconciliation or permanent estrangement will define the future. This combination of visible consequences, moral tension, and unresolved questions primes viewers for the climactic emotional payoff of Act 5, where long-term implications and psychological clarity will be revealed from the very first moments of the feud. It was easy to misinterpret the conflict as a simple spat over a comment about the animal shelter or a dismissal of PTSD. But as the dust settled and we could step back from the immediate drama, it became clear that what unfolded between Amy and Tammy was never about one fight. Act 5 is about unraveling the core truth, the layered emotional, psychological, and relational dynamics that have built over years, culminating in a moment that felt explosive but was decades in the making. The calf confrontation